Welcome to lab 24 and day 14. So, till this stage, what we have done is we have created a 3-tier architecture. We have a middle tier with all the business logic. We have the data access layer where we have all the SQL statements, and we have two kinds of user interfaces. One is the Windows form and the other one is the web application. Okay, so we are at a very, very good stage, and this level what we have reached is appreciable. Okay, but what our application currently is missing is one very important thing, and that is security. In simple words, anyone can go run our application and start modifying the data. So probably what we would like to ensure is that anybody who goes and accesses this application, he should be a registered user in our system, right? So in this video, what we'll do is first let's go and implement security in the Windows application, and then we'll go and try to implement the same in the web application. Right. So the first thing what we have to do to implement security is we have to go and create a table, where we'll go and register our users. In other words, we need to have some usernames and passwords, right? So what we'll do is we'll go to our SQL server here, and let's go ahead and create a very simple table here. And in this table, we'll create two fields. One is the username field, and this field data type will keep it as nvarchar and of 50 length. And the second field, we'll name it as password, and we'll keep the length as again 50 characters. Okay, and let me name this table as users. Right. So if you see now in my database, in my CusDB database, I have one more table here called as users. Let's go ahead and make some entries into this table here. So let's go ahead and create some fictitious users. So must be the first user can be Shiv, password pass@123. Second user can be Raju, Raj@123. In simple words, anybody who wants to go and access our application, should be a registered user, from this table, right? So let me just go and close this, and let me go back to my application here. So the first thing what we'll do is, we'll go and implement this security in Windows application. So the first step is to go and create a very simple screen, which has a user ID and a password. So let me go and add a very simple form here. So I've gone ahead and I've clicked on the customer data entry screen. I've right clicked on it, and then I've said add new item, and I'll go and select this template from here, that is Windows form, and I'll give a name here saying login. So let's click on view, let's go to toolbox, let's go and drag and drop two labels here. Label 1, slow, and again I'm going to go and drag and drop one more label here, label 2. So one label will have username, so I'm going to just go and right click on this label 1, and we'll name this label as username. So this will display username text, and this will display password. And also what we would like to do is, we'd like to also go and put two text boxes here. One text box will take the username, and the other text box will actually take the password, right? So I'm going to go here and drag and drop a text box. So this will take username, and this will take password. So I'm going to go right click. Let's give this text box name as txt username, and this text box as txt password, right? And let's make this screen very compact here. Okay, and also we'll need one button over here. So I'm going to go and drag and drop a button, very simple button here, and we'll say login. We'll give the name of the button as btn login, and the text as login, right? Great. So you can see that we have created a very nice simple login screen, and what we would like to do is, when the user goes and runs our Windows form, this is the first form which will actually run, and when he puts the appropriate username and password, which exists in this table here, in this users table, it will allow the user to go inside the system. Also, just to make things look better, what we'll do is we'll go and modify this text of the form here. So you can see this login text on the form. So I'll just go and modify this as customer login, just to make things look better. So you can see that, I've changed the text over here of the form to customer login, right? Now the next thing what we need to do is, as soon as we run our application, for now what happens is, if I go and make, my Windows application as startup, and if I run it, what happens is it goes and runs, the MDI parent form. So you can see this MDI parent form running. Now this is not what we want. What we want is that as soon as the end user goes and runs our Windows application, the first thing what we want is we want to go and run the login screen. Once the login screen pops up, and if the end user goes and puts a proper username and password, then it should allow the end user to go inside the application. So in other words, the first step what we need to do here is we need to ensure that our login screen runs first and not the MDI parent, right? So what we'll do here is, in order to go and run our login screen, if you remember, right, as I said previously when I started my classes in the previous 1 or 2 days of the class, where I said that the first thing what runs, when the Windows application kicks off, is this thing, that is static void main. And you can see in this static void main, he is running the MDI parent as a startup. So what we need to do here is we need to say that, okay, do not run the MDI parent, but please go and run the login form. So you can see that I'm going and creating the object of the login form and passing it to the application.run method. So I'm going to go and change this, and just to quickly test, if really it pops up the login screen or not, let me do a Control F5 here. Go do a Control F5, and you can see our login screen running. Now the next thing is, when the end user goes and puts a proper username and password, in this login form here, we would like to go and validate, these usernames and password, from a dbo.users table which we had recently created. So as soon as the end user goes and puts in the username and password, we would like to go and validate, these credentials, from this users table over here. Now we would like to go and continue the same tradition, which we have been following from the previous labs. That is, we would like to go and ensure that we follow the 3-tier architecture. In other words, when the end user goes and puts in a proper username and password to the screen over here, it will first go and hit, the middle tier, and the middle tier will go and hit the data access layer, and the data access layer will actually go and hit the database. So in other words, we would like to go and follow the same architecture which we have been following in the previous labs, right? In simple words, the first step what we now need to do is we need to go and create a very simple class here called as a users class, which will help us to go and validate, if the entered username password is appropriate or not. So let me go and close the screen over here, and let me go back to my Solution Explorer here. And the first thing what I would like to do is I would like to go to my middle tier here, and I would like to go and add a very simple class here. So I'm going to go and add a new item here. I'll go and select this class. We'll go and create a very simple class here called as the user class. And you can see that he has created a very simple class here. Now in this class user, right, we'll create two properties. One is username and the other one is password. So we'll say your private string username. This is one property, and the other property is private string password, right? And we'll have two set and get properties, for these variables. So we're going to have one property here which will actually go and do a set and get, for the password, and one more property here which will actually do a set and get for the username. So you can now see that we have two private variables here, username and password, and both of these variables are set by the public property, that is username and password. Once the usernames and password are set to this class, the other thing what we would like to do is we would like to go and check if this user is a valid user or not from the system. So in other words, when a person goes and creates the object of this user, he sets the username and password. He will then go and invoke this isValid function to check if this user exists in the database or not. So in other words, in this isValid function, we need to go and write our ADO.NET code, which will actually go and check, if this username and password which is set in those private variables, do they exist in the system or not. Now, as a practice, as we said that we are not going to write the ADO.NET code here, but the ADO.NET code will be written in the data access layer. So what I'll do is I'll go to my data access layer here, and let me go and return a very simple data set here. Okay, and this data set will actually go and query our table, that is the users table. Okay, so I'm going to go here and say public data set, I'll say get users, okay, or get user. So to this function, right, I'm going to go and pass username, and I'm going to go and pass password, right? So you can notice that how I am religiously trying to follow the 3-tier architecture, and that's what differentiates a developer and a good developer. Okay, so I'm a good developer. Okay, right. So the next thing is we need to go and query this users table here, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and copy paste this code from here, Control C, and I'm going to go and paste it over here, Control V. Okay, and so what you're going to say is that, okay, go and query the users table. So select star from users, right, where the field name is username and password. So I'm going to say here where username is equal to, remember that both of them are strings, so start with a single quotes plus the data which is passed to the function, username, plus again a single quotes, comma, right? Okay, not a comma, actually it's an AND condition, and password is equal to the password which is passed in the function. So I'm going to say password and single quotes closed, right? So you can see that we have created, or we have constructed, a very simple select statement here. And this select statement, what it does is it actually goes and takes the username and password which is passed to the function and goes and creates the select query, right? And whatever data comes from this is returned as a data set back from this function, right? So we have created the data access layer part of it. Now the next thing is we have to go and call this code, right, this get user code, into our isValid function over here. So let's go ahead and create the CLS SQL Server class here. Now in order to go and create the CLS SQL Server class here, we have to first go and import the data access layer namespace. So there it goes, and here we'll go and say CLS SQL Server obj is equal to new CLS SQL Server, right? And we're going to say here obj dot, okay, get user, get user, username, comma, password. Okay, now if you remember, right, this get user is actually a data set. So what we can do is we can say here if dot rows data set dot, sorry, the tables, right, of 0 dot rows dot count, if it is equal to 0. Okay, in other words, if no records are loaded, that means the username and password is not valid, right? So you can see that what I'm saying here, if this data set returned by the get user function is not having any rows, that means we have not found the username and password inside the system. So we're going to go and return false over here, right? And then in case if it has something, then we're going to go and say return true, right? So we have created the data access layer. The data access layer is called in the middle tier. Now we are at the last step, where we have to go and connect the UI with the middle tier. So we have done, the data access layer and the middle tier part. But now the final thing what is remaining is to connect the UI to the middle tier, right? So let's go to our user interface here, and let's go to the login button click. So let me just click on the login click here. So here we need to call the user class, right, to check if the user is valid or not, right? So the first thing what we have to do is we have to go and import the middle tire, right? And the next thing what we have to do is we have to go and create the user object and say user, and we need to first go and pass the username, which is typed in the text box, right? Second is we also have to go and pass the password, which is typed in the text box. And the final thing what we have to do is we have to go and invoke the isValid function to check if the usernames and password are proper or not. So in other words, if the isValid returns true, then this is a valid user, right? And if the isValid returns false, then it's an invalid user, right? So what I'll do here is, in case it's an invalid user, I'll just put up a message box here saying message box.show invalid credentials, right? Now if he's a valid user, what we can do is we can go and say that please go and invoke the MDI form and start running the application. In other words, what we want is, if he is a proper user, we would like to go and invoke this MDI parent object obj equal to new MDI parent, and we can say here obj.show. So in other words, MDI parent, right? And we can say here the obj, we already have this object name as obj, so I've just made it obj MDI, okay? And then we can say here go and show the MDI parent object. So in other words, when the application first starts, right, it actually goes and invokes this login form. Now this login form, in his button click, right, he checks if the username and password is proper or not. So if the username is not proper, what it does is it actually shows a message box saying invalid credentials, and after that it actually goes and invokes the MDI parent. Now there is a big problem with this approach. Let me explain the problem. Now if you watch closely the flow is something like this. First, the static void main runs. The static void main goes and invokes the login form. The login form goes and checks for your username and password. If he finds the password is proper and the credentials are proper, he will actually go and invoke the MDI parent, or else he will show up a message box saying invalid credentials. But if you watch this flow very closely, one question is very important here to answer is, if somebody goes and close that MDI parent, what happens to the login form? Because the login form is still running at the background, right? He has invoked the MDI parent. So what happens is, even if you go and close the MDI parent, this login form will not go out of memory. That's the first point. And the second point is, we also get into complications of making the login form visible false, visible true, and a lot of other things, right? So must be we should think about some other decent approach. So a better approach would be that from the static void main, we first go and pop up the MDI parent. And in the MDI parent load, we go and pop up the login form. And the login form, will not close, until you put a proper username and password, right? Once you put a proper username and password, the MDI form will go and unload the login form, and he will start running the application. So in other words, from here we'll first go and invoke the MDI parent, right? Then in the MDI parent form load, so in other words over here, so here we'll go and create the object of login, okay, the login form. So we'll say login obj equal to new login, and we'll say your obj.show dialog, right? So in simple words, as soon as the MDI form runs, the login form is invoked. The login form then goes in a dialog mode. Dialog mode means it will keep running until either the person puts his username and password proper, or either he goes and closes the form, right? So if the user is valid, what I'll do is I'll say that, okay, please go and close this form and let MDI form take up the complete control and start running. And in case if the user is not proper, it will show as invalid credentials. So in simple words, first the program.cs will invoke, it will go and invoke the main static void main function. The static void main function will go and invoke the MDI parent. MDI parent in its load will go and invoke the login form. Now this login form will keep running until the end user puts a proper username or password, or probably he goes and cancels this form. Okay. So also what it also means is that, you know, what we want to ensure is when this login form runs, right, the end user cannot go and just close this form from here. Okay. So what I'll do is first I will restrict him to not go and use this cross symbol here to go and close the form. So if he wants to close the form, probably I can give him a button here, which will, I'll give him a button here, and by using this button he can go and close the form. So I can give a button here called as close, right, BT and close. So as soon as the person goes and clicks on this close here, it will actually go and close this form here, right? And what I would like to ensure is that he does not use this cross symbol here to close the form, because I want to take the complete control of closing the form. So in order to ensure that the user does not use this cross here to close the form, you can go and set this control blocks property to false. So if you set this control box property to false here, you can see that the minimize button, the maximize button, as well as the close button has gone off, right? So we are all set now, right? Let me just go and build the application. Everything looks fine, and let me go and run the application, right? So that my application is running. So in case I put up a username which is not valid, something like this, SSS, and if I say login, you can see that he pops up me invalid credentials. Okay. And if I go and put a proper user like Shiv and Raju here, so Shiv is the username and pass@123 is the password. So if I go and put a proper username and password here, Shiv and pass@123, you can see that I have now gone inside the MDI parent and I can start using my application, right? Right. So I hope that you have enjoyed this video. So in this video, what we did is we implemented security in Windows Form. So we created a simple login screen. We created a middle tier which had the user class, and the user class was connecting to the data access layer. And in our database, we created a very simple table here called as the users table, you know, from where the validations were done. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. In the next video, what we'll do is we'll try to understand that how we can implement security in web applications. Now remember that in a web application, security is very different than Windows application. So what my suggestion would be to please go and see the following video. So log into your corresponding video account, go to .NET Fundamentals and ASP.NET section, and over there you can see that, you know, we have 6 videos. You can see over here we have 6 videos on ASP.NET authentication and authorization, or I'll say 7 videos. You know, there's one video which is a theory video, so you can see till here, right? So what my suggestion would be to go and watch, you know, all of these 7 videos, you know, before you come for tomorrow's lab. So in the next video or in the next lab, we're going to see that how we can implement security in our ASP.NET application. But before that, please ensure that you go and see these 7 videos so that you know that what's going to happen in the tomorrow's lab. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.